Oh, hi everyone. Didn't see you there. Thanks for joining me again and putting up with a few problems. Just sitting here in my cafe enjoying the weather. It's just gorgeous out like usual. I'm on Discord again, so folks jump on if there's any delay or if things are sounding a bit odd, let me know and I'll fix things up as we kind of go along. So today we have a chat about, let's see, and there we go. Sexual selection, speciation, and coevolution. So hopefully let me know everything sounds okay. I'll get things going. All right, looks like we may be doing fine. All right, welcome back everyone. I hope that your Easter weekend was good. I hope you had a little bit of a relaxing time, and I hope that everything is starting to get a little bit back to normal, or at least you feel that things are back to normal even though we're all stuck inside. I'm actually enjoying being stuck inside. It's kind of nice. Going outside out of these walls now is starting to freak me out a little bit, so this is a little bit better for me. All right, so today we're going to talk about how natural selection can affect how species change over time. So we're going to be applying some of the things that we've learned to understand how things shift in nature. So, like usual, I want to start with a little bit of a recap. So I want you guys to tell me what is the definition of evolution. So hit me up in the, well, my comments for some reason aren't working here, so hit me up in Discord. Hopefully you guys will hear me just fine. I'm just going to get myself a little bit of tea while I'm waiting for you guys to tell me what evolution is. Yes, thank you very much, Ben. It is the change in allele frequencies, which ends up leading to changes in gene frequencies as well. And then, of course, it leads to changes in phenotypes, which is where we see that macroevolution kind of happening. So well done, everyone. I love the fact that you guys are nailing it in. Perfect. Let's keep that going through it, and we'll see if we can have a little bit more fun. All right. So again, now tell me the three things. I've told you the first thing there, of course, variation. What are the other two things that determine or that ensure that evolution does end up happening? Yes. I love that you guys are nailing this so quickly now. So maybe I'm pounding into you guys, which is great. You guys really need to remember this stuff, because this is the fundamental aspect of evolution. Of course, I have to be drinking tea because I'm in a cafe. It would be silly if I wasn't drinking at least something, right? So we've got to play the part. So we have selection. In this case, it's directional. And we have heritability, which leads to changes in the allele frequencies in the population, changes in mean phenotypes within a population, and then individuals evolving over time. So what does this imply? That over time, like I said, new species are created. Now, of course, this usually takes a really long time because you need several different processes to happen to ensure that individuals aren't interacting or there's some kind of separation happening within a population. So now we're going to go through a few ideas of what's necessary to occur within a population, or how populations can be separated for them to lead to an evolution or changes in different species within a population, or enough changes that they become two different species. Sorry, it's still early and it's been a long weekend, needless to say. So the first one we're going to take a look at is, so we'll skip to the next one, is allopatric speciation. And you guys probably remember this from first year. This is the idea that something separates the population or cuts it in half or cuts it in pieces, and this prevents these two groups within a population from interacting with one another. That means selection acts independently on these two populations. That could be natural selection, that could be sexual selection. For example, populations could vary in the predators that are on one side versus another, or they could vary in, if we go back to our spider example, they could vary in the habitat types and how well signals are transferred. And what that essentially means is that over time, these two populations begin changing separately. And because they start changing separately and their allele frequencies are changing in different rates, in different ways, then they slowly end up becoming two different populations and two different species. Okay? So if that, let me know if that doesn't make sense. The idea that in some way these two different groups within a single population become isolated from one another, and this leads to them separating and not interacting, and that leads to selection acting differently on the two groups, leading to new species being created. All right, so that's one. So there's another, what I wanted to show you here, totally forgot, is the fact that through human behaviors, we're separating populations all the time. And this is why we often create these little rope bridges across highways to allow animals to move between different areas within a population. And that prevents, or that maintains gene flow, which means that individuals can still kind of evolve together. So, Tim, is there a way we can use these lectures for revision? Yeah, you can rewatch all these live feeds. So they're on the Arludo channel, so you can just head back to that channel at any time and you can watch them again. Yep. So this is our version of rope bridges, usually in most westernized countries, in North America and in Australia. In Europe, they've done a much better job of these, and they've started, in some areas at least, starting in Scandinavia, where they're actually making these bridges much more habitable for these animals and making it easier for animals to reconnect within different groups to ensure that there's that gene flow happening, because we want to make sure that animals are able to reproduce with whoever they need to or want to, so that all those genes are being passed within a population and we can maintain genetic diversity. So a really nice example of allopatric speciation is the guppies in Trinidad. So they live in these waterfall kind of cascading structures where there's individuals in pools at the top, and every once in a while these waterfalls in these pools push some little guppies into different areas, into downstream, into these different little ponds. And what that means is that these upper ponds are now become separated from these lower ponds, right? Because gene flow is only happening in one direction, from top to bottom. These little guppies can't swim up these falls. So that means there's new genes coming down in the ones below, but up top, that's isolated from everyone else. And it's a really nice experiment, a natural experiment, because in the top you have very different predators than you do have in the cascading pools below. And as a consequence, we see differences in traits that end up evolving over time, because these predators, or natural selection, is acting on different traits for upper and lower populations of individuals in these pools. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't, just drop me a line here and I'll kind of keep going. So another type of speciation that can happen is something called the founder effect, or parapatric speciation. And that's where a small group of individuals end up leaving and setting up a population someplace else. It's kind of what's happening in that guppy situation as well, where small groups of individuals are being pushed out of that upper population, being pushed down. But here they're leaving and they're isolated, and over time this becomes a new species because individuals aren't coming back up. And a really good example of this is Drosophila species in Hawaii. Because these different islands are of different ages, you have individuals living and moving to different islands as they become available. So, and you can hear these lines demonstrate all the different directions that we've had founder effects happen over time and the order in which they've happened. And what that really means is that genes were flowing in different directions at different times, and individuals in different areas were isolated from other individuals at different times. And there's been some really, really nice studies looking at the underlying genetics of these different populations and these different species in these islands. And what you can do is you can start finding out exactly when they separated, when new individuals founded new populations that ended up becoming new species, and how these individuals are related over time. So this can happen in any kind of area where individuals inhabit kind of a new niche. And niches are something that we're going to talk about in a little bit towards the end of the lecture. So this is another form. It's called parapatric speciation, where individuals within a population are deciding to selectively mate with particular individuals. So as you can imagine, this is a little bit more rare because that preference that's happening in certain individuals must be really, really strong. And it must be really, really heritable so that offspring have that same kind of preference. So like I said, this is a little bit rarer, but we do see it leading to new species happening, even though when individuals are right next to one another. So a neat example is in wolf spiders, where you have these spiders right here, for example, have these brushes on their legs. And these brushes on this individual are black, but they also come in a brown color. So females of the species like a specific color, and that what they like actually depends on what they've encountered the most of while they were growing up. So females that found or encountered with males with dark brush legs, and dark black, they prefer those males when they mature. But individuals who mature or who are developing around individuals with brown tufts end up preferring brown tuft males. So here we have this kind of separation happening within the population as a consequence of what females like. But this isn't genetically determined in this case, because it is determined by the environment, what females are experiencing as they're developing. So as a consequence, there also has to be some spatial kind of organization happening within the population, where brown individuals are on one side and black individuals are on another side. Now that may happen if that color of that leg is strongly linked to a specific gene, but we don't know if that is in this case. But you can see how this can start happening, how the situation has to be really, really particular and very specific in how individuals interact and how the traits are passed on towards other individuals. And that can lead towards new species as well, which hasn't happened in this population of wolf spiders, but has happened in other organisms. So this is a really bizarre kind of thing, and it happens very rarely. So the question here, before I get into that one, the question is, how many species actually use the rope bridges? Not many, and it's not necessarily, it's usually a smaller species. If we go back to that allopatric speciation example, often it's a few individuals of smaller species. It's enough for genes to be passed between different groups on the sides of these different bridges and to keep gene flow happening, but it's not like individuals are using it all the time. That's why you can imagine those grassy bridges, for example, being much better, because individuals don't have to work as hard. They can move between shelter while they're working across those grassy knolls, while in the bridges they're really open to all kinds of predators, especially if there's aerial predators. So Ketty asks, is parapatric speciation different from allopatric speciation in that they leave the population of their own accord rather than suddenly getting separated? So you can think of it that way. It's not necessarily the case, though. Allopatric speciation does imply that there's some kind of block that's happening. You can imagine a mountain over geological time kind of separating populations, or floods happening for a particular time within a population, separating the two groups. That's usually some kind of natural disaster or some kind of natural factor that is resulting in individuals being separated. Parapatric speciation may be individuals actually choosing to leave, but it also may be individuals being blown away. For example, you could imagine in those Drosophila, those individuals could have been moved by people transferring fruit to different islands, and there may have been larvae on that fruit, and they hatch in that new habitat and they colonize a new population. It could be, us carrying them in our luggage or cargo. It could be them being swept away over by wind, which would be a really long distance, but it can happen. They could be on driftwood. So it doesn't necessarily have to be them choosing to leave, but choice can play a role in that compared to something like allopatric speciation. So hopefully that answers your question. So I'll keep going to sympatric. So this is much rarer, even more rare than the previous example. And we don't have many really good examples in the literature. And this is where a certain number of individuals within a population just start preferring a specific niche within that population. And what that ends up happening is it results in individuals not interacting with other individuals who prefer that other niche at all. So they never interact ever, and as a consequence, selection happens independently on these two groups, and you can have resulting speciation happening. So one of the better, okay, I'm going to get into that I think next. I'm hoping I didn't miss a slide. Anyway, so one example is Darwin's finches. So here we have finches that vary in their beak size, and there are seeds that vary in their size as well. And different finch beak sizes can break seeds of different sizes open. And now what's happened in this island is that droughts end up occurring. Say drought-tolerant plants that may produce seeds of larger sizes end up surviving, and the smaller seeded plants don't survive. Well, that means there's no food for the finches that have small bills. That means they end up dying out. So there's a strong selection for bills with larger finches. Finches with larger bills, sorry. So that can happen over time. And then as maybe more rain happens, then you have smaller seeds happening again, and then a selection towards smaller bills. And over time, you can end up seeing a number of different species happening on an individual island. So this is example before a drought. There's this distribution right here of median or mean bill size. And then after the drought, what ends up happening is bills end up getting bigger. Or those ones that have bigger bills end up surviving and reproducing more because they have a higher fitness. That bill size is heritable, and your offspring are more likely to have a larger bill size, but you still have variation because of the environment or developmental factors, and that changes over time. And that can end up leading towards different species as well. So there's a lot of different examples. Some of them are more common than others, but all these different factors can lead toward the evolution of new species. All right. So here's a weird example of niche specialization where individuals exist at the exact same time, within the same place, within the same population, but they choose not to interact with one another at all because they end up growing up on different fruits that end up flowering at different times of the year. Some of them grow on this one species of apple and another one on another species of apple that, like I said, end up flowering at different times. And because they end up flowering at different times, they end up mating at different times and choosing mates at different times. And that means that individuals don't interact with these individuals that are next to them at all times just simply because they prefer laying eggs and hatching and growing up in different types of plants. So this is a really, really rare example of what we saw in the Darwin's finches and this type of speciation where individuals are preferring a particular niche. All right. So why are niches? How can we think? What's another way of thinking of niches? Because I want to put it in a way that everyone can kind of understand. And one good example that I've kind of used over the years is coffee. And if we think about different niches within coffee, what we see, if we think about coffee when it first kind of started. It was just this black liquid that people drank for a caffeine hit. Then it got a little bit more popular, and of course, we started creating coffee in a different way, freeze dry, which made it accessible to a whole different new market of individuals who may not have access to things to be able to brew coffee properly. So now you have this other niche happening where there's groups who prefer this kind of coffee. Then we may have, everyone really likes this coffee, but there's some companies out there that start producing coffees of different sizes. Because some people like a little bit of coffee, some people have these enormous amounts of coffee that they drink throughout the day, which is usually in North America. So you start having these coffee suppliers that have more variation in the size of the coffees they end up providing. So there's a new niche, right? There's another new niche when you start getting into specialty coffees, when you have milk, like lattes, cappuccinos, piccolos, so on and so forth. So now you have people, stores creating new types of drinks for individuals who like it and servicing a different type of the population. And once again, this is a new niche in the coffee world. Then, of course, you can start adding syrups and flavors and whipped creams and orange mocha frappuccinos, and you start having a new niche where individuals are preferring this style of coffee. Then you can get into wanting to be like George Clooney, and of course, trying to show off your wealth and ending up buying coffee that is, coffee beans that are pooed out by a civet. So you can see that all these different types and brands of coffees exist because they're servicing a particular market. And this is equivalent to niches in a biological sense. So when there's new areas, new markets, new niches open, individuals can inhabit that niche and end up leading to the evolution of new species, or in marketing terms, the evolution of new products. So what I want you guys to think about for a second is, could coevolution lead to exploiting new niches? Now, you guys are probably asking me, what is coevolution? Well, there's this perfect Futurama episode that I love showing at this time. So I'm going to do it now, and we'll see if this can actually end up staying. If not, I'll always cut it out later, and I can re-upload the video, so it's not too much of a worry. But let's put it on there because it is a perfect, almost a near perfect example of coevolution. So let's see, I'm just going to turn the sound on here. So hopefully this all works just fine. So this is a great episode where Fry meets these new individuals. Okay, we'll just leave it here.
A story of two alien species, so ancient that compared to them, the human race is a mere college senior. On a distant planetoid, they evolved to cooperate in their quest to survive.
Cooperation, because life is a team sport.
But over time, one species evolved a better strategy. And an evolutionary arms race began.
Nailed it. I love this one.
That concludes the audio-visual portion of our head clunk and lecture.
All right. So I love that example of coevolution because it shows really, really quickly how different species can respond to the selective pressures other species enforce on them. But what I want you guys to tell me, there's a couple things that this example highlights really, really well. And what was that one thing that Fry said? I want you to tell me what that problem is that Fry said at the beginning, which is kind of elaborated on throughout the rest of the example when that coevolutionary arms race ends up happening. So what does Fry say, and why is what Fry says wrong? All right. So our lag isn't too bad today, which is kind of nice. Life is a team sport. That's exactly what he says. Thank you, Sram. Now, why is life not a team sport? All right? That's what I want you to think about. Why is it better? Okay, well, I don't want to give the answer out. So, why is life not a team sport? Okay. So if you think about how those two different species in an example are interacting with one another, that's a good example of why it's not a team sport. But I want you to see if you guys can think of, and now I see that, of course, my Discord is not connecting well. Let's see if I can get it to a different one. So what are those two? What ends up happening in the latter end of that example? And how are those two different species interacting with one another? And now I see that all of my connections to you guys are off, so I will just try and restart Discord, and I'll just go on. And so it's because individuals are selfish. If you think of any organism on any planet, they're selfish because they want to pass on their own genes. It's better if I pass my genes than individuals next to me pass on their genes, because I'm most often not related to them. So individuals are selfish, which is the reason why life is not a team sport. Now there are often, oh, excellent. Yeah, so thank you. You guys were nailing it. So it's restarting. It is because competition to get the most resources. Exactly. Everyone is my rival, and your allies don't pass on your genes. That's all exactly right. So you guys nailed it. Thank you. I'm very, very happy you guys hit that right on the head. So you can see why those two different species in these examples were taking advantage of one another. Because it's better to try and kill and eat that other individual, because it's a bigger meal, than work together to share that tiny little fly that was, or bug that was on that leaf. Now there's another thing that they didn't really mention in this example, but is key to the evolution of those different behaviors happening that those different species showed. That frog and that snake. So, when can evolution happen? I want you to remember those three things that I've been pounding into you guys over the last few lectures. Those three things that are necessary, and what has to exist within that population for those traits to be able to evolve. All right? Have a think. Once again, I have to restart this. But see if you can have a think of which one of those three things is now important, most important for those traits to be able to evolve. Adaptation is what happens, Scuba Tim, but it's Daphne is right. It's variation, right? Because those traits, those responses to that coevolutionary arms race, the response of the frog opening up its mouth to swallow the snake, there has to be variation in that opening up your mouth behavior and your likelihood to eat your ally. Then for the snake to respond, there has to be variation in, let's see, actually, let's see if we'll show this. Yeah, we can show it again. There has to be variation in the ability for that snake to blow itself up. Because that's a trait. If selection is going to act on that trait, there has to be variation in how big that snake can make itself to be able to flatten it. Then there has to be variation in that behavior of that toad to be able to stab that snake to deflate it. So there must be variation in these traits. This evolution doesn't create new combinations. It only acts, or selection acts on variation that already exists. Okay? So there has to be variation in that behavior, that swallowing behavior at the beginning. There has to be variation in that ability to blow yourself up. Then there has to be variation in the ability for that frog to pierce that, and then for that snake to do this really weird behavior where it turns itself inside out. It's just awesome. So variation is extremely important, and selection can only act on that variation. It can't create new types of phenotypes. And of course, the way that ends up happening is through mutations, through all those things that we talked about 2 lectures ago. All right? So we will go on. So now, why I wanted to bring that up is because individuals can kind of interact in different ways. And that can lead towards different relationships between different species. In some ways, they're mutualistic, because here's this flower right here that has a long kind of opening that only hummingbirds can pollinate. So in this kind of way, they're working together. This hummingbird gets a little bit of nectar. This flower gets this hummingbird to pollinate it and other individuals and pass on their genes. So that's great. But what can end up happening sometimes is that other species can come along that don't play by these rules. And these guys can take advantage of these flowers, and rather than going in through the opening at the front, they're going in at the back and just stealing the nectar food. So these guys are taking advantage. They're parasitizing this mutualistic relationship. And this leads to this flower not passing on its genes, and this bee getting a really, really nice reward out of cheating the system. Then we can have another kind of relationship called commensalism, where one species interacting with another species actually has no effect on either of them. Like this example of this spider that's created a web within the antlers of this other species. So this doesn't harm this guy at all, but the spider actually ends up gaining a benefit because there's lots of flies probably buzzing around, and they probably get stuck in the web. It can move towards different areas, and it's pretty safe from predators. Whoa, oh, I see that for some reason I've lost. Well, that's so weird. I've totally lost my, there it goes. It's come back up. There we go. Here we have these birds that end up living around bison because as these bison are eating food or eating the grass, they're shaking up different bugs, and these little birds, these cattle egrets, end up doing really well because they can eat the bugs that end up flying around because what is going on? Anyway, hopefully this doesn't last too long. And it's the same with these kinds of plants. So this is a relationship where one species gains a benefit, but at no cost to the other. Holy cow, what is going on? I'm totally getting, this is what happens when you rely on technology, I guess, eh? So, let's see, I'll use this keyboard instead. I don't know what's going on. So, there we go. All right, and then here we got this parasitic, and so now I specifically want to go about parasitic relationships where one individual completely and utterly takes advantage of another. In this case, I'm going to talk about a plant taking advantage of wasps. Here's an orchid that looks a lot like a wasp. And other male wasps come around and try and mate with this flower. Oh man, this is a new problem. Always something different. I don't understand what's going on. But anyway, if you guys have any questions, let me know in here. So here's a really neat example of plants evolving in a really, really kind of, I'll answer your question in a second, Inigo. Can plants evolving really neat traits in the same way that those spiders that I showed you before, peacock spiders and Habronata spiders in North America, where they're responding to the selective pressures placed on them by male wasps, or needing to look like male wasps so they get mated with, and they can pass on their pollen towards different flowers. Now, of course, this is great for the orchid because it passes on its pollen. It's not good for the males because they're wasting energy and time in searching for these orchids and mating with them, and they just don't get that opportunity to mate. So they're wasting resources and energy, and they get nothing out of it. So there's a parasitic relationship. So Inigo, you had a question. And glucose, you're right in that previous example of coevolution. The traits must be heritable, absolutely. So, Inigo, could the herbivore benefit from flies with the web? Yeah, it could. You could imagine a benefit where there are less flies, so they don't get bothered as much in the skin, no bites, they don't get that annoying flies. So if that does end up leading towards that herbivore having a greater fitness, then you can imagine that being a mutualistic relationship rather than a commensal one. So hopefully that answers your question there. So when we think of any kind of ecosystem, we can imagine different organisms resulting in different selective pressures on other organisms. So now we normally think of that through natural selection, but that could be through individuals working together or parasitizing one another. So all these different relationships between individuals and understanding these relationships between individuals is extremely important. So when you think about the ecology, there's a lot of underlying evolution happening there that is resulting in changes in the ecology. And for some reason this is going back and forth. I think my computer is actually dying, which is unfortunate. It is 7 years old, but what can you do? And I believe that is the end. So it's a little bit of an earlier lecture today. So let's see. There we go. We'll end up there. So let's see if there's any questions. So rather than having a lecture next Thursday, because we released your fungal prac marks, I'm going to have an open session where you guys can ask me any kinds of questions about that, how you can improve your marks, what you can do. And of course, that's because we don't have the decomposition lab anymore. It's really, which is, I hope you guys are as disappointed as I am about that. We would have loved to see the results of your experiments and what's happened, especially because you guys put so much work into them. But unfortunately, this is what happens with a global pandemic. So you can imagine, at least we have another assignment that we can give you guys. You can imagine the number of master's and PhD students around the world who are stressing out now because their research is on pause, even though their degree is not. So you'll get a chance to rewrite your fungal prac. So on Thursday, we'll talk about how you can do that, what you can do to improve your marks, which you should have really, really great comments about that. But I'll be specifically giving a chat about stats, because it seems that a lot of you guys had a lot of trouble understanding how to interpret statistics, what they mean, how to use those statistics to understand what's happening and how to describe what's happening in a population. So we will be talking about that. So what I really want you guys to do is take a good look at your assignments before Thursday, and if you have any questions, I'll be here and we'll have a little bit of a chat. On Friday at 2 o'clock, we'll have a really, really quick prac where we'll play a game called Hungry Birds. Sorry, no, we'll be playing Xenon Crow. So we got that all fixed, which is really exciting. So we'll be able to test that out again, and we'll just be talking about predator-prey interactions, predator learning, and we can apply some of these ideas of evolution on understanding how prey traits and predator traits end up evolving. So at the end of that should only be about a 20-minute class, 30-minute class. At the end of that, we'll have a bunch of data that we've actually collected in those 20 minutes by playing this one game. And I'll give you guys those data. We can talk about them really, really briefly online. But then you guys will answer a couple questions about those data. So it'll be a really short assignment. It should only take you about 10 minutes after that to answer those. You can hand those in at the end of the day, and for those that aren't in Australian time, you guys can hand them in at the end of your day. And then that will be one of your last assignments. So hopefully that all makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. Other than that, I'll be on, I see Discord is not starting back up again properly. So let's see if there's any questions just before I go. Here we go. No, there is no final exam. This is why it's really important for you guys to take the fungal prac seriously. Because we had so many people in different countries, Sue, Helen, and I felt that a final exam is too awkward and difficult and too stressful for all you guys. So that's why we really want you guys to take that fungal prac seriously. This is some of the best feedback you will get in your undergraduate for your writing. So take it seriously. You can ask us questions as you're working on things, and please try and do your best. So it's Lulu, so it's just a Friday assignment and the fungal prac revamped as the remaining assessments? Yes, and don't forget the conversation article, which you guys have already handed in. Yes, so that's it. Yes, you're right. So that is a Friday assignment, which won't take you very long, and I really want all of you to be there. I want to see the numbers go up to the class, which is 50. Because we need all those individuals there. I'm going to send out a reminder every day, but I really, really want you guys all to be there. I'll go as far as saying that there will be a mark associated with that for attending this live lab. And then it's that fungal prac. So those are your last 2 assessments, absolutely. So you have plenty of time to do those kinds of things. You don't have that final exam, so please take this seriously. And a question about the lecture. When a species develops a strong system of sexual selection, does it usually decrease or increase the fitness of the species as a whole? And that is a great question, and it can do both. So there's no really clear answer. Selection can be so strong that it can lead to a population dying out, or it could lead to runaway selection of particular traits. And this is really, really interesting to study in sexual selection, because we can try and understand which factors are responsible for selection going in these various ways, and for populations evolving particular traits, existing, doing well, or even dying out. And that's why biologists end up studying so many different populations and understanding all these environmental, behavioral, and developmental factors that can influence how individuals interact within the populations and how populations and species kind of evolve. So if you have any other questions, we'll throw them up on Discord. And that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all later.